I will follow the law, but I will not keep that as a separate grant entity. You and I can disagree all day long on what the law is.
Well,
that's being consolidated into the Office of Justice Programs. I'm not going to cut, let me answer, I'm not going to cut anything that's going to hurt violence against
not
women.
My question.
It will eliminate
I'm asking, just for your information, Attorney General.
I'm not going to talk about anything that's alleged. What I will talk about with you, hold on, you asked me a question and I get to answer it. What you asked me, alleged conduct that's part of a pending whistleblower lawsuit that was filed on the eve prior to Emil Bove's hearing today.
I'm not asking about that
suspicious.
Case
hold on, let me keep going. I would
General
run
Bondi,
through a wall for
my
Emil
time,
Bove and Todd Blanche.
Like to continue with my questions. I have very limited time.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to America First, the channel that tells you the truth the mainstream media won't. If you're new here, make sure you hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, and ring the notification bell because we're bringing you the real news every single day. And hey, if you want to support what we're doing here, head over to patreon.com/AmericaFirst and support us for as low as $5 a month. Your support keeps us independent and keeps us fighting for the truth. Today we're going to break down this absolutely ridiculous performance by Senator Patty Murray attacking our attorney General Pam Bondi during her Senate testimony. What you just witnessed was a perfect example of everything that's wrong with the Washington establishment. Here we have a seasoned prosecutor, a woman who has dedicated her life to law and order, being attacked by a career politician who has spent decades contributing to the very problems she's now pretending to care about.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Bondi, we are in a deeply alarming moment where law and order is being replaced by chaos and corruption and really whatever Trump wants. And your department's independence and its capacity to do its job have eroded before our eyes. We have seen respected career officials who've been fired for doing their job. Thousands more are being pushed out with your buyouts and the threat of mass firings, and entire divisions are being eliminated, and grants have been canceled illegally. So I have questions about how and why those decisions are being made, and importantly, whether you're adequately resourcing DOJ to do its job. But before I turn to my questions, I do want to raise my alarm about the troubling pattern of trampling basic rights. Detainees, including U.S. citizens, being shipped overseas without any due process. Elected officials are detained for conducting oversight, and a U.S. senator gets tackled to the ground for asking questions at a press conference. This is not the country I know or the values I believe in, and I hope that colleagues on both sides of the aisle will agree with that. Now, to the questions. Yesterday, and I know that Senator Van Hollen raised this issue, a former DOJ attorney filed a protected whistleblower complaint accusing Deputy AG Emil Bove and senior DOJ leadership of defying court orders, including through, quote, lack of candor, deliberate delay, and disinformation, unquote. The complaint also accuses this administration of firing the whistleblower for, quote, telling the truth to the court. These allegations are deeply concerning. Now, I know you said that you can't discuss the case, but can you confirm that you agree that this administration should follow court orders?
We will follow court orders, Senator. The entire administration will follow court orders. The problem arises in the district courts. All these district courts throughout the country are tying our hands. But here's how we will follow them when we get to the United Supreme Court.
I need to ask
we're winning.
A number of questions.
And so, yes, we're following the orders of the court.
Let me ask my questions. Can you confirm you will not allow any conduct like what is alleged to continue at the DOJ?
I'm not going to talk about anything that's alleged. What I will talk about with you, hold on, you asked me a question and I get to answer it. What you asked me, alleged conduct that's part of a pending whistleblower lawsuit that was filed on the eve prior to Emil Bove's hearing today.
I'm not asking about that
suspicious.
Case
hold on, let me keep going. I would run through a wall for Emil Bove and Todd Blanche.
Like to continue with my questions. I have very limited time. Thank you. I just want you to confirm for this you will not allow conduct like that at the DOJ. Yes or no?
I will always support and defend Emil Bovee, and I will defend Todd Blanche. They are two of the finest people I know and two
I
of the
was asking
ethical
about the
people I
conduct.
know.
Let me keep going here. Now, in April, DOJ abruptly terminated over 300 public safety grants that had already gone through a very rigorous and fair and apolitical application process with no explanation. This is funding to investigate and prosecute drug trafficking, to support foster care kids who experienced abuse or neglect, to expand access to forensic exams to prosecute violent crimes like sexual assault. These really senseless cancellations have already forced public safety organizations to cut employees and services. So I want to ask you, when you cut off the community-based violence intervention and prevention initiative funding, were you aware it is used to prevent and reduce violent crime?
Yeah, Senator, you weren't here for that, so I'm going to have to repeat myself. We have cut grants. I think we've cut 6%. But if we have cut a grant that you feel should not be cut, please reach out to me. I will personally look at it. We've turned multiple grants back on. Okay. We have an appeal process. But if you want to come to me directly, I would be happy to sit down with you and look at that and help you.
I'm happy. I appreciate
Again, we're doing everything we can.
Okay, but let me just ask you, when you cut off the expanding access to sexual assault forensic examination grant, were you aware that that grant helps our authorities prosecute rape and sexual assault?
I have no idea about that specific grant you're talking about. That's why I said if you want to come sit down with me, I would never cut a grant intentionally that has anything to do.
Those recipients on the other end across the country.
Can you give me the details of that grant?
I can absolutely do that, and my staff will get that to you. But those are two critical ones that I just wanted to ask you about today.
Again, we've turned many grants back on, and we'll continue to. If you want to call me, and we can discuss them with you.
Okay, in your budget request, you propose consolidating the Office on Violence Against Women into the Office of Justice Programs. In 2002, Congress actually codified the office as a permanent, separate, and independent office to implement the Violence Against Women Act. We did that to make sure that violent crimes against women receive the necessary attention, expertise, and resources, and to give the office a strong, independent voice within the Justice Department and federal government. Now your department wants to fade that into the OJP, which violates the intent of the law that we passed. It makes grant programs less effective, and it places a lot more barriers for victims and services they need. And I see that you're cutting the office's resources by about a third. So will you commit to us, the Appropriations Committee, to follow the law and maintain OVW as a separate grant entity?
I will follow the law, but I will not keep that as a separate grant entity. You and I can disagree all day long on what the law is. Well, that's being consolidated into the Office of Justice Programs. So I'm not going to cut, let me answer, I'm not going to cut anything that's going to hurt violence against women.
Not my question.
It will eliminate
I'm asking, just for your information, Attorney General, in 2002, we codified the office as a permanent, separate, and independent office. So that you need to go back and take a look at that. I know my time is out, but I thank you very much for the time.
Let me start by addressing Senator Murray's opening theatrics. She claims we're in a deeply alarming moment where law and order is being replaced by chaos and corruption. This is rich coming from someone who was silent for 4 years while the Biden administration weaponized the Department of Justice against political opponents. Where was Senator Murray when the FBI was raiding the home of a former president over classified documents while ignoring the classified documents found in Joe Biden's garage next to his Corvette? Where was her concern for law and order when cities were burning during the summer riots and progressive prosecutors were refusing to prosecute criminals? The hypocrisy is staggering. Murray talks about respected career officials being fired, but conveniently ignores that many of these so-called respected officials were part of the deep state apparatus that spent years trying to undermine President Trump's first administration. When you have FBI agents texting about insurance policies against Trump, and when you have intelligence officials lying about Hunter Biden's laptop being Russian disinformation, cleaning house isn't corruption, it's necessary reform. Attorney General Bondi handled this perfectly. When Murray tried to trap her with questions about following court orders, Bondi gave a clear, direct answer that we will follow court orders. But she also pointed out the reality that we're dealing with activist judges in district courts across the country who are legislating from the bench and trying to obstruct the will of the American people. The fact that many of these cases will ultimately be decided by the Supreme Court isn't some admission of wrongdoing. It's how our legal system works when lower courts overstep their bounds. Murray's attempt to create some controversy around the whistleblower complaint against Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove is particularly pathetic. This is the same playbook we've seen over and over again. Create a last-minute accusation, file it right before a hearing, and then demand that officials respond to unsubstantiated allegations in real time. Bondi was absolutely right to refuse to engage with this obvious political theater and instead defend her deputy. When she said she would run through a wall for Emil Bove, that's the kind of loyalty and leadership we need from our Attorney General. The American people are tired of officials who throw their subordinates under the bus at the first sign of political pressure. We want leaders who stand by their people when they're doing the right thing. Bondi's strong defense of both Emil Bove and Todd Blanche shows she's exactly the kind of leader who will restore integrity to the Department of Justice. Now, let's talk about these grant programs that Murray is so worked up about. She's acting like cutting government grants is some kind of catastrophe, but this is exactly what the American people voted for. We voted for an administration that would stop the endless flow of taxpayer money to programs that aren't working. The fact that the Department of Justice cut 6% of grants and established an appeals process shows they're being responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars while still maintaining accountability. Murray mentions grants for community violence intervention programs, but let's be honest about what many of these programs really are. They're often just ways to funnel money to progressive activist organizations that push anti-police narratives while crime rates soar in their communities. The idea that we need federal grants to prevent violence is backwards. What prevents violence is strong law enforcement, prosecuting criminals to the full extent of the law, and supporting our police officers instead of demonizing them. The same goes for these other grant programs Murray mentioned. Federal grant money has become a way for Washington bureaucrats to control local communities and push progressive policies. When Attorney General Bondi says she'll personally review any grants that Murray thinks should be restored, that's not a sign of chaos. That's a sign of hands-on leadership and accountability. One of the most telling moments in this exchange was when Murray tried to lecture Bondi about the Office on Violence Against Women. Murray claims that consolidating this office with the Office of Justice Programs somehow violates federal law and will hurt victims. This is the kind of bureaucratic thinking that has made our government so inefficient and ineffective. Having multiple offices doing similar work creates redundancy, wastes resources, and often leads to turf wars that actually hurt the people these programs are supposed to help. Consolidating these functions makes perfect sense from a management perspective. It eliminates bureaucratic silos, reduces administrative overhead, and ensures better coordination between related programs. The idea that this somehow means the administration doesn't care about violence against women is exactly the kind of bad faith argument we've come to expect from progressive politicians. Attorney General Bondi made it clear that she's not going to cut anything that hurts violence against women, but she's also not going to maintain inefficient bureaucratic structures just because that's how things have always been done. This is the kind of government reform that Americans voted for. We want our tax dollars used efficiently and effectively, not wasted on redundant bureaucracies. Let's also address Murray's dramatic claims about detainees being shipped overseas without due process and elected officials being detained for conducting oversight. These are clearly references to the ongoing deportation operations and the arrests of officials who were obstructing federal immigration enforcement. This isn't a violation of due process. This is the enforcement of immigration law that has been ignored for years. When local officials actively obstruct federal immigration enforcement, they're not conducting legitimate oversight, they're breaking federal law. The fact that some of these officials are now facing consequences for their actions isn't evidence of authoritarianism. It's evidence that the rule of law is finally being restored. Americans voted for immigration enforcement, and that's exactly what they're getting. The broader context here is crucial. For years, we've watched as progressive prosecutors refuse to prosecute criminals, as sanctuary cities protect illegal immigrants who commit violent crimes, and as federal agencies are weaponized against conservatives. Now that we have an administration that's actually enforcing the law equally and cleaning up the corruption in federal agencies, establishment politicians like Senator Murray are crying foul. This is exactly why the American people rejected the establishment in the last election. They're tired of politicians who talk tough on crime during election season, but then make excuses for criminals and tie the hands of law enforcement. They're tired of bureaucrats who think their job is to resist rather than implement the policies that voters chose. Attorney General Pam Bondi represents everything that's right about this new administration. She's a career prosecutor who's actually put criminals behind bars. She understands that the role of the Attorney General is to enforce the law, not to make policy based on political considerations. Her willingness to defend her deputies while also holding people accountable shows the kind of principled leadership we need. The fact that she's willing to personally review grant programs that senators are concerned about shows she's accessible and responsive to legitimate concerns. But she's not going to be bullied into maintaining programs or structures that don't serve the American people effectively. This is exactly the kind of leadership style that will restore public confidence in the Department of Justice. What we saw in this hearing was a perfect microcosm of the battle between the America First movement and the Washington establishment. On one side, you have Senator Murray representing the old way of doing things where bureaucracy grows endlessly, where accountability is optional, and where political considerations trump law enforcement. On the other side, you have Attorney General Bondi representing reform, efficiency, accountability, and the rule of law. The American people have made their choice clear. They want an Attorney General who will enforce immigration law, who will prosecute criminals regardless of their political connections, and who will clean up the corruption that has infected our federal agencies. They want someone who will stand up to activist judges and fight for the constitutional principles that make our country great. Senator Murray's performance in this hearing perfectly illustrates why Americans have lost faith in the establishment. Instead of focusing on real solutions to crime and violence, she's more concerned with protecting bureaucratic turf and scoring political points. Instead of supporting efforts to make government more efficient and effective, she's defending the status quo that has failed the American people for decades. The truth is that Attorney General Bondi is doing exactly what she was appointed to do. She's bringing accountability back to the Department of Justice, she's supporting law enforcement, and she's ensuring that federal resources are used effectively to protect the American people. The fact that this threatens the established order is not a bug, it's a feature. As we move forward, Americans need to understand that this kind of resistance from establishment politicians is inevitable. They've built their careers on the current system, and they're not going to give up without a fight. But the American people spoke clearly in the last election, and they expect their elected officials to support the agenda they voted for. That's why it's so important for patriots to stay engaged and continue supporting leaders like Attorney General Bondi, who are fighting for real change. The mainstream media will continue to twist these hearings to make it seem like reform efforts are somehow dangerous or illegitimate, but we know better. We understand that draining the swamp was never going to be easy, and we understand that the establishment will fight back at every turn. What gives me hope is seeing leaders like Pam Bondi who aren't intimidated by these political attacks. She stood her ground, defended her people, and made it clear that the Department of Justice will be run according to the law and the Constitution, not according to the political preferences of establishment senators. This is what winning looks like, patriots. This is what it looks like when we finally have leaders who put America first instead of putting the establishment first. The road ahead won't be easy, but with leaders like Attorney General Bondi fighting for us, I'm confident that we're going to restore law and order, clean up the corruption, and make our justice system work for the American people again. That's all for today's video, patriots. Make sure you like this video if you agree that Attorney General Bondi handled this perfectly, subscribe to the channel for more truth-telling content, and head over to patreon.com/America first to support our work. Your support keeps us independent and allows us to keep bringing you the real story that the mainstream media won't tell you. Until next time, keep fighting for America first.